Welcome back to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Cressey, and this is episode 154. Today's episode is one that is actually really overdue. It's with my business partner at CSP Florida, and it's one we were actually going to record all the way back in 2020, and then life got crazy with the pandemic, and we kind of pushed it back, and it was actually a real blessing in disguise because since then, he's developed really heavily in the manual therapy realm, and a lot of really cool research has come out on the benefits of manual therapy, why it works better in some people than others, why certain approaches may be more suited to certain presentations. So I'm actually glad we waited, and he's just one of the most talented guys in the world and has really impacted my career favorably, both in the context of teaching me on the daily basis, giving me a sounding board to bounce ideas off of, and challenging me in ways that I hadn't previously thought about, but also in the way that he's really taken amazing care of so many of our athletes, from youth sports all the way up to some of these guys that you see throwing in huge games on TV. Just a really good guy and a really great clinician that I think has a lot to share. So this podcast is an excellent representation of that. This episode is brought to you by Athletic Greens, the most comprehensive NSF certified for sport daily nutritional supplement I've ever tried. With so many stressors in life, it's difficult to maintain effective nutritional habits and give our bodies the nutrients they need to thrive. As a father of 3 young kids and a co-founder of multiple businesses in multiple states, on top of still being an avid exerciser, I know that busy schedules can really take their toll on us. Whether it's poor sleep, exercise or life stressors, environmental factors, or simply not eating enough of the right foods, we can wind up deficient nutritionally. This is where Athletic Greens can really help. It's a game-changing nutritional insurance policy. They simplify the logistics of getting optimal nutrition on a daily basis by giving you just one thing with all the best things. And that's why I use it daily and recommend it to our athletes. 1 scoop of Athletic Greens contains 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients, including a multivitamin, multimineral, probiotic, green superfood blend, and more. They work together to fill the nutritional gaps in your diet, increase energy and focus, aid in digestion, recovery, and supporting of a healthy immune system. This all can happen without taking multiple products. While most nutritional products come to market and stay stagnant, Athletic Greens continues to obsessively improve this one holistic formula based on the latest research, producing 53 improvements over the last decade. They invest in the most absorbable and natural source of each ingredient and go above and beyond in third-party testing to ensure their customers continue to receive the highest quality and best daily nutritional habit on the planet. It's lifestyle friendly, whether you're keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free, and contains less than 1 gram of sugar without compromising on taste. They put 75 ingredients through the NSF for Sport certification to come up with a formula that's trusted by some of the world's best athletes, including our own. Right now, Athletic Greens is giving our listeners 10 free travel packets with their subscription. Simply go to athleticgreens.com/Cressey to receive my offer. These travel packs are perfect for supporting your immune system, energy, and gut health when you're traveling for games, training, or simply when you're on the go. They can be a great counterbalance to less than ideal on-the-road food options. So if you want to bridge the gap between deficient and optimal and give yourself the best chance to get nutrient diversity, then head to athleticgreens.com/Cressey and get your 10 free travel packets today. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/Cressey, Cressey. Today's guest is Vice President and co-founder of Cressey Sports Performance Florida. Prior to joining the CSP team, he co-founded Athletic Development Performance, a Jupiter-based sports performance facility that worked with youth, collegiate, and professional athletes across multiple sports, but they did have a heavy emphasis in baseball and lacrosse. He's also a licensed massage therapist. In addition to his work as a manual therapist with CSP athletes, he served as a manual therapist for the Miami Dolphins since 2018. Across these roles, he works extensively on athletes from professional baseball, golf, tennis, and football. An International Youth Conditioning Association certified high school strength and conditioning coach, he's been published in U.S. Lacrosse Magazine, MLB.com, and he also hosts U.S. Lacrosse's Coaches Education video series. He coached the Benjamins High School lacrosse team from 2010 to 2017, along the way guiding them to 2 state titles, 1 state final, and 4 state semifinal appearances. He won U.S. Lacrosse South Florida Coach of the Year awards in 2009 and 2017, Palm Beach Post Coach of the Year in 2014, 16, and 17, and the Sun Sentinel Coach of the Year in 2014 and 17. He was also the offensive and defensive coordinator for Dwyer High School during their 2009 state championship season. He's a certified trainer for U.S. Lacrosse's Coaches Education Program, and as an athlete, he was a 2-time All-Conference selection and first-team All-Tournament selection as a lacrosse player at Belmont Abbey. Please welcome to the show my business partner, Shane Rye. Shane, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
I begrudgingly accept. No, just kidding. Thanks for having me.
I was actually going to lead into this. It's hilarious because normally you have like this, this text from afar to like set this up, and we literally spend practically every living moment of our professional lives together. So there'll probably be a lot more busting of chops on this podcast than anyone we've done, but that'll make it more endearing to the listeners.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Right on. So I obviously know your story. We've been attached at the hip basically for the last 9 years, but I do think it's probably appropriate for everyone else to, to get a little insight, not just into, why we're talking about manual therapy with you, but maybe your path to this entire athletic development field and, in sports medicine kind of, concurrent path. So what got you to here?
Actually, I think the original aspect was like being born 2 months early
Mm-hmm.
and having like a kind of like a bunch of issues. So obviously, we're the '80s here. And then like I actually didn't know this until like a few years ago, but my mom was like, "Yeah, like you coded. Like I didn't see you for a couple days." And so, the doctors had told my mom, like, "Oh, you'd probably never play sports or do anything like that." And then as I was growing up, once I hit like puberty stage, I remember I'm like playing basketball and like I just pass out and like they can't necessarily figure out why. And so I end up seeing one doctor who actually tried to put a pacemaker in me at like 13 or 14. He's like, "Oh, you're never going to play any sports again." And obviously, like, I'm crying, at this point. And my mom, fortunately, had worked in a cath lab for like almost 20 years. And so she was pretty good with the question. So I had to see a different doctor at Penn State and go through all these random tests and, the Holter monitors. And I mean, it was years and years of testing, but had to consistently pass stress tests year after year to keep playing sports, and then eventually somewhat kind of like grew out of the condition.
Mm-hmm.
That that they weren't 100% sure what was going on with that, but um, that kind of led me into a little bit of like you know, training stuff. Well, can we be in better shape? Like, how can we, help keep some of this stuff at bay? Because I never forget like running up a incline treadmill for like 20 minutes, and they're like, "Well, if you get above a level 7, then you're not going to be able to play." And I'm dying. I'm like, "Oh, I'm like a 3." Um, but then my senior year of high school, I blocked a punt, and like my knee, like I heard it, like it kind of exploded. And I'll never forget like trying to get up, and it was in practice too, so it wasn't even like a cool story. Like, oh, like it changed the game or anything. Like it was a practice punt, and so like my knee was like super swollen, and I'm trying to like hop through. I'll never forget my coach. To his credit, like he was trying to make all of us tough, and maybe we need a little bit more of this sometime today. But I'm like, "Coach, I don't think I can bend my knee." And he goes, "How many knees did the good Lord make you with?" I said, "2." He goes, "Use the other one." I'm like, they work in pairs, but you know. So that was kind of my initial path, and then over the course of you know years after that year, it hit like a really rough patch. Had gotten sick and had some like personal stuff, and I had lost like a ton of weight, and I was so weak. I was so weak, and so that kind of got my path onto strength and conditioning. And then over the course of 4 more knee surgeries over other various, stupid things that happen in sports and wrestling and things of that nature, kind of led me, down this path of like the why, right? So I always used to joke with my friends, they're out kind of like drinking on a Friday night or doing whatever. We're lacrosse players, so that's imagine that lacrosse scene. But I would be like kind of reading on forums or like trying to read through like super training, which was awful, but it's super insightful at the same time. And so that kind of led me into kind of the strength and conditioning field, and kind of where we are today.
Yeah. And it's a funny joke. Like you and Brian Kaplan and I co-founded this business, and you had bum knees, I had a bum shoulder, and he had thoracic outlet before it was cool. Like we literally checked every sports medicine box working inferior to superior as we founded the business. But, you know, we got going and we first started out, you're obviously a really accomplished lacrosse coach, but also obviously a strength and conditioning coach. And right when the business kind of started up, you were dipping your feet, I guess, in the shallow end of manual therapy. And I kind of endeavored to really make that your own, and obviously it's taken off in a huge way. The clientele you see is next level, and you're involved on some really high profile cases. What was it that drew you to manual therapy? In the first place, where did you see that fitting into who you were personally? Obviously, our big picture offering as well.
Um, Honestly, it started with probably Dwight locally,
Mhm.
a local PT, and we had to when we had our original gym, the people who we were renting our place from uh, had kids who were athletes, and one had a particularly really bad back issue, and so we were somewhat, originally I said, jokingly said coerced to work with a local PT, but he had really good hands and kind of shed a different light on things of this, manual therapy and what it does. A lot of trigger point, and still kind of trying to review the body systemically, but I was like, what is this? Like, how am I? How have I gone through 5 knee surgeries and
Mhm.
um, you know, 3 legitimate rehabs and 2 of which were kind of on my own, but like, how have we not like discovered this? So I saw like the initial kind of like, you know, we're have ADD. We're guys. We like quick fix on things. I'm like, oh wow, that makes your back pain feel a lot better, or your knee pain, whatever that might be. So that was kind of my initial thing. So we were kind of dabbling for a few years. So I would say it was probably like 2012 or 13, and we didn't have a chance. The school I was coaching at the time, we were away at. We didn't have any field space at the school because they hadn't had a turf field yet. So I was essentially trying to act as like a very poor athletic trainer at the time, when we were away, whether it may have, at practice, or whether it may have been wrapping an ankle or something like that. We kind of had to do what we had to do. So that ended up
Mhm.
coming into play quite a bit with, kids that were hurt or trying to just address a situation at the time. So, and then finally we had like random people, and you remember what that little shack used to look like that we were training people out of. But like a couple random people were like, "Oh, I heard you could help my shoulder feel better," showing up at the door. And I'm like, I don't know who these people are. I'm like, I'm totally going to get in trouble if I don't get certified for something. Like,
Mhm.
this is totally going to be illegal. And didn't want to go out of my scope even more than maybe I already had. So quickly kind of went back and had a crazy 9 months of massage school and getting up early and training clients, and then also going to lacrosse practice and doing that. So that kind of led me into
Mhm.
that manual therapy path. But I think the big thing was when we came together, and one of the reasons for coming together was like, you don't like, not one person was doing everything anymore, and so
Yeah.
we were able to um, share some synergies, but also like kind of be able to like, hey, where's a void in our business right now that this could be helpful, right? Like, I hated the accounting side. You
Mhm.
100% filled that void. Like, I just, that wasn't me. Um, so I think this was like an area that we could help fill the void, and more importantly, for athletes and the baseball players in general, having those off seasons where they're not having to search to try
Mhm.
to find and go outside and try to find a different PT to do this, and then a different, throwing partner, where Cap kind of came in, and trying to circle all that around made it a lot more convenient and easier to, and desirable for that matter, to kind of
Mhm.
push forward into manual therapy, knowing like, hey, we have other people that can write strength and conditioning
Yeah.
programs here. Like, have to be out there all the time.
The follow up question to that is, it's one thing to get licensed, it's another thing to get really really good. Like coveted, where athletes are wanting to fly you all over creation, and obviously come in just to see you, and the schedule gets packed very very quickly. I know I have my perspectives on why you were so good so fast, but I'm curious what you think allowed you to like achieve such a high level of proficiency, and popularity with potential clients so quickly. What do you think did it for you?
I think a lot of stubbornness,
Mhm.
honestly, like
Yeah,
in many respects.
yeah,
You hate not knowing why, which is
yeah,
kind of ironic that we're talking about manual therapy right now and
yeah,
wanting to know the why of it, considering that
yeah.
for since the existence of manual therapy, it's been really hard to prove the why,
Mhm.
other than anecdotally. So I think that was a big part of it. But I always tried to view it through kind of a strength and conditioning and
Yeah.
athletic lens. And so I think that was probably most helpful for me. And because I didn't have like a super, super formal training in school,
Mhm.
That can both help and hurt you at times, but it was a being able to think outside the box because you didn't have like this narrow lens of like, well, the book said it must be this, so it has to be this because this is what we do with somebody who has insert name of injury here.
Mhm.
So I think that that was really, really helpful. But being able to try to piece stuff together, watch them move, it was helpful. And then I think, and I think this is super, super underrated. And people think that this, I might be joking when I say this, but like having a room that's in an office that's like a locker room for
Mhm.
people becomes very, very comfortable.
Yeah.
For guys to just kind of relax, make them feel like they're, in the clubhouse or in the locker room or be themselves.
I think, I'll share my side of it is one, you're a voracious reader. Like I know you're absolutely absurdly meticulous with your continuing education stuff and the work you put in there. The other thing I think there's just something to be said. Like I've seen you like pissed off when the hour ends and you haven't found the solution yet. Like I've seen you climbing on top of tables, like pouring sweat because it's not just about like babysitting somebody for an allotted time. It's about getting the desired outcome, no matter what it takes. I think that resonates with people, really, really heavily. And the other thing too is like you kind of hinted at it, but you were a football, lacrosse, and wrestler, like three sports that take a ton of physical exertion. You kind of have to embrace the suck in all of those. Like manual therapy is hard. Like you got a thumb in somebody's armpit for all these hours, and it beats you up. And I've heard people joke that like the useful life of a massage therapist is like 3 years because it is so physically taxing. And I think one of the things that you probably do well without even realizing it is like you contort your body in so many different positions to work on people on a daily basis that you very rarely get into kind of that pattern overload just because it's such an interactive session where people aren't just laying there, like you're actually getting them moving as you treat. I think people see that, it's like watching a coach that stands still and has their arms crossed and doesn't interact with you versus like someone who's really involved in the entire treatment. I think that goes a really, really long way in creating a favorable outcome for people.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I think them just knowing you care, at
Yeah.
that point is super important. But I think people appreciate that ultimately in the long run that you're not just like staring at the clock the entire time. But I
Mhm.
think one of the other underrated things is the ability to be able to whether it's you or any of our other coaches being able to go out and say, hey, here's what we just found, right?
Mhm.
Like I had no idea that until we touched XYZ here. Here's what we're currently seeing as a favorable change. Maybe we substitute this exercise or we deviate this certain exercise and maybe you elevate a foot or you change the position of whatever they might be doing at the time to be able to like make it an impactful change immediately following a session or
Mhm.
whether that's in their whatever they're going to be doing the next few days in their program. So and I think
Mhm.
that's wildly helpful to be able to consistently because we're still obviously using Excel and things of that nature, but our programs are constantly, they're organisms that are constantly moving. And we're
Mhm.
able to adapt based upon what we see of that athlete on that given day.
You hinted at it, and I've joked about this. Massage has been on cave paintings for 4 or 5 thousand years, but it's been somewhat loosely defined why manual therapy works, if at all. And I think we should dig in on that. And maybe the first place to start, for maybe more of our novice listeners who aren't like knee deep in this stuff on a daily basis, like let's talk about the fascial system. What it is, what does it do, how do you explain it to your clients? We're trying to outline what it is that you're actually treating and trying to favorably impact.
Yeah, so I think like one of the tools, and it's definitely like a hammer for me is probably like fashion manipulation. Definitely from Stecco stuff, and kind of got way more into that over the last few years. But it doesn't always make sense to the clients, and it honestly doesn't always make sense to us in the given moment at times. So when you have somebody who comes in and they're like, "Well, my back hurts. Why are you looking at my knee?" For example, when that comes in, the easiest example I like to use is just and we kind of did this the other day. Was we just start like, hey, I'm going to start pulling down your shorts, and inevitably, as you start pulling down their shorts, they're going to grab their waistband and pull it up real quick. And they're like, so what's wrong with your pants? They're like, oh, I felt my waistband pulling down. I'm like, yes, that's what you felt. But the area and the issue and the concern for me was me pulling, down here at your ankle or down here at your knee. So I think that kind of helps set the tone a little bit. obviously for our for our football guys, and explaining that to them is like, if I'm a outside linebacker and you're a defensive end and we're trying to blitz the quarterback, but you're supposed to go inside and I'm supposed to go outside, but we're stuck together. Well, we kind of blow up and occasionally make some good plays, but now we've affected everybody else's alignment behind us, and we're not really good at. I'm not good at doing your job, and you're not good at doing my job. So I think that that's like super super important and helpful in trying to illustrate the point, especially when people are skeptical of, well, it hurts here, please push here,
Mhm.
type of questions. But I mean, fascia is really just like a thin layer of connective tissue, surrounds our organs, our blood vessels, our bones, our nerve fibers, kind of holds our muscles into place. But it's also super sensitive. Right, the innervation of fascia is very similar to skin in some of the studies that they reviewed. So it is very very sensitive and can kind of give us like a tactile feel as well. And it's filled with mechanoreceptors and how it senses the world. So that's really important. And as far as like talking about musculoskeletal pain, or especially people who've been in chronic pain, there's some studies out there that really really dive into the fascia in and of itself and its role in chronic pain. Matter of fact, for that matter, if you go through some of the Steco stuff in their level 3 and level 4, they talk a lot about like internal dysfunction,
Mhm.
and that if the liver's supposed to sit here and it's not sitting there, is it creating an inflammatory response? Right? You have people who come in who have psoas tension or whatever, and sometimes those people have gut disorders, and there's lymph, right there too. And so I think the fascia kind of helps us have like a better interplay of seeing the body systemically. Not to mention it
Mhm.
is pretty important in force transmission as well,
Yeah.
especially across multiple planes and vectors. Um,
I know, and one of the things that I find you talking about the most is hands, feet, and head. Like
yeah,
that all like lines lead to that. Maybe elaborate on that a little bit for our crew as we kind of start to dig in on this anatomical basis.
I mean, I think that was probably one thing that I didn't take into enough account, in my younger years. And honestly, one of the frustrations that kind of led me to doing more fascial manipulation work was like, that you released the glute, or that you released it and they feel better. And you're like, well, why is it coming back so quickly? And that means there's something going on there that we haven't correctly identified, or something else in this
Mhm.
body that we're not identifying. So the hands, the feet, and the head, that's always my pop quiz for people when they come in. That's where it all starts or stops, depending on what your viewpoint is. So if like you look at like the retinaculum, for example, in an ankle, it's a stabilizing structure in many respects, because it doesn't have a hip. A hip has a nice hip capsule, right? An ankle can easily be dislocated compared to a hip, but all of those little muscles are going down into there, and then obviously they sway out into the feet. The fascia does, and how that retinaculum can be pulled and pulled on, and how those tissues and tendons are sliding and gliding there, can be very very impactful from a global perspective, especially in your brain and how it senses the world around you. Um, I know a couple of people in the fascia manipulation circle had like a hypothesis that when you have like what they call densification, or you have stuff, for example, in your hands, that it actually throws your body's perception off of where that actual end range is of that movement,
Mhm.
or where your hands are. Maybe when you're completing a pitch, and how that can somehow throw that off, how your body and your brain perceives that.
That's fascinating. I mean, so you alluded obviously to fashion manipulation and something that you obviously have your personal preferences for, especially over the last couple of years. Like maybe outline what the tools are that need to be in the toolbox, and then maybe more globally, like why is it important to have more than one tool in that toolbox for different people, different scenarios.
Yeah, so I think like you know early on, with some of the other modalities, whether it was trigger point or active release, a lot of times like you're learning really good stuff, like, and you're diving into deep anatomy. But I think the one thing that really helped as far as like the fashion manipulation model, was, and again, I want to do a preface that if you're viewing the world through that model, because different models are viewed differently, was that there was of a system there that
Mhm.
made a lot more sense. There was always, I always used to joke like, you and I are going on a cross country road trip, and if we don't have a roadmap, I don't know where the heck we're going to end up at. And we might end up at some cool places from time to time, but we might end up in some bad places too. So I think the fashion manipulation aspect, that's probably like my main tool. But if it's a day before a starter start, and that that let's say that you have a pitcher and they're experiencing some type of I don't know, call it anterior shoulder pain, and then you find out as you're going through your exam like that they broke their wrist as a kid, and you go down there and you start palpating and you find their particular center of fusion or center of coordination, which is just fancy terms of where their densification is, and how that aligns to where they might feel their pain. Like I'm not always sure that it's in their best interest unless it's a World Series and you're trying to really win that game. It's in their best interest to go dig in too much in that area. I think there's other therapists that maybe would, um, but being able to be on a field and watching the velocity of movements, whether that's a baseball pitcher's shoulder, whether it's a hitter swinging, or for me every Sunday watching the speed at which they move, being on the field and leaving them with an increased inflammation could potentially create a negative outcome for them, in my opinion. So in that case, that's when you kind of jump back on to a different tool that's like maybe it is an active release, maybe it is, an FR release, maybe it is a Pales Rails, maybe it is a trigger point. And that to me is really more of just trying to get them through that game.
Mhm.
Jab, 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 so you can kind of hit them with a knockout punch. Uh,
Yeah.
Hopefully after that game. So I think it's important to be able to be, when it comes close to game day, the mentality of a player too, right? I think that's important too. We have guys who come in all the time who, it might be a Saturday night and they want cupping. Like I'm going to do it if that's what they want because that's what they think that they're going to be helpful and prepared. But if I know that a guy has, let's say he has a hamstring pull, and one of the things that you'll find, and you'll hear me, I've referenced this a couple times now, is you go through your health history, and that's important because half the time people are going to forget, what they heard. Um, and when you're going through it, you realized, hey, they had like a really nasty rolled ankle as a kid, and that laid them up for like a couple weeks. But that was 15 or 20 years ago, and that's not going to matter now. That's the joke with the older clients when they come in with neck pain. I usually like, hey, when did you break your foot or hurt your ankle? Right? You can't compensate anymore. You get the last of your joints that you can compensate at. But if I know that I have to like, he rolled his ankle and there's still some a fascial disturbance or densification. I think what was I can't remember the name of the study, but I think in the rat models that it was like as little as 3 weeks that you can start getting a hyaluron buildup or a lack of hyaluron where tissues, especially at your mono and biarticular fibers, as they don't cross, right? They don't slide and glide the way that we want them to. And so if you think about that, and that may have been years and years and years ago that may have happened, like we don't necessarily know what impact that's going to have on a back problem that may have happened 10 or 15 years later. But in the case of the hamstring, like I can't in good conscience like really dive in on that calf right then and there and try to hang out on it for 2 to 30 minutes. I think that's what most of the literature says,
Mhm.
and create an inflammatory response right before they're going to go play. Or I can't go look at the coach and be like, hey, so and so's down today, so I hope you can adjust your practice plan. Or
Yeah.
so I
I
think
mean,
that's
I,
important to have
I
that.
think your point about like hammering home like the health history is huge. Like I'm even blown away at how rarely we see people list like the medications they're on and stuff like that. There's so many different things that can jump in. Like when you see a clean health history, you really have to pry and see if they were just like racing through it, not really interested in fully filling it out. I think that's a really valid point. One follow up question I did have for you is, there are different approaches, right? There's certainly, more focal strategies. You talked about trigger point. Obviously, like dry needling is about as focal as it comes, and you have stuff that's more, diffuse, where you're, maybe it's a, instrument assisted modality or like a cupping with dragging or something like that. Like, do you see a place like personally? I've never felt really great from dry needling. you throw a cup on me and drag it around, I feel like $1,000,000. I'm very responsive to something that I guess has those distraction properties. You know, what's like big picture look on it? Like obviously this speaks to the different things in the toolbox, but do you see any general tendencies on when you might use certain things with certain people?
Yeah, I mean, sure. First and foremost, it's probably preference for people. Like a lot of
Mhm,
times when you see people, they may or may not like cupping. They may or
mhm,
may not like needling. Needling for me, like I've always found it very beneficial. For example, in my hips, but didn't
mhm,
felt that it did much on my shoulder. Right, and is I don't know if that's maybe we didn't hit the right areas or whatever
mhm,
that might be. Um, I feel like a lot of times when people are very very tense, it just in general, like you can tell when that guy has like a stiffer fascial sling or they're just stiffer
mhm,
people. I think they tend to like cupping and the dragging with it. But I think it's working a little bit differently than maybe we perceive because no matter what, whether we're talking about a PRI model or we're talking about a compression and expansion model or we're talking about a manual therapy model, no matter what that is, I think at the end of the day, all we're really trying to do is manipulate fluid
mhm,
and move fluid or get it to start to move in an area or get it moving out of an area, in a case of like an acute injury, for example. So when you have cupping, for example, like some people love going through that through movement. I think if you were to ask somebody who is like doing stecco, for example, or doing like a deeper type of work, if you will. I think when you look at that, like cupping is still like we could probably put a cup on a CC,
mhm.
or a densification and let it hang out there for a few minutes and create a difference in the fluid and the viscoelasticity of that. And matter of fact, there was this study that they talked about. It just came out was the effect of the range of motion, or it was out. I'm sorry, a few years ago. Was the effect on the range of motion of neck range of motion, for example, and how the lower limb stretching on that actually dramatically changed, flexion and extension patterns. And in this particular study, they found like the specific things that the hamstring, for example, was more impactful for them than was the adductor. So I think that was probably like that's a big ticket for me of trying to really realize like, hey, where we think it is, it ain't. I think that was an Ida Rolf quote.
Yeah.
And so like to answer your question, in that case, I'm probably doing a little bit of cupping for guys,
Mhm,
especially if they like it. But I'm also probably trying to plant the seeds of and trying to dig in a little bit deeper of like how can we have a longer term result here, right?
mhm,
So we know that for the most part, that research indicates that you need to be on something for at least 2 minutes before you have a positive effect. Like if you were to look at, some of the Stecco work or FR stuff, which piggybacked some of the Stecco work, in their world, they have mechanical versus neural tension, right? Like, is it a localized thing in that muscular or fascial system that is not allowing whatever you need that particular joint or muscle to do to properly do that, or is it a brain thing where it's just such a co-contraction of all the muscles around there that that's going to be more of a therex and a strictly therex thing for a period of time?
mhm.
So I just think it's important to have those different tools.
Yeah, I mean, maybe jumping in, and I want to dig in on maybe the baseball specific aspect, but before we get there, I think it's important to stay more I guess 30,000 foot view is maybe talk about some of the common mistakes that we see in the manual therapy community. What are a few that jump out at you?
Yeah, I think I mean there's a couple, right? It's hurts here, push here, and I might be the worst with that, to be honest with you. Like when I get treatment at times, like I've had treatment, and I'm like, listen, I know that this is not really my issue, but I still want you to touch here because it makes me feel better, right? But
Mhm,
I think it's like hurts here, touch here. I think it's an incomplete medical history, but I think the biggest one for me that always pops up into my mind and is really, really resounding is just because you and I have the same shoulder pain doesn't mean we have the same cause, even if it's in the
mhm.
exact same location, because we are very different.
Yeah.
Our histories are very different. I just don't think people spend enough time on it either, right? Like, so a lot of times when we're going to give guys follow up stuff, right? Like, if I'm going to go and I've had, some weirdo uh, sciatic pain, for example, that
Mhm.
was not truly discogenic in nature. Um, we'll see guys rolling and stuff like that, but that's not like fascia can't we can't make it adapt that way. Fluid's not going to it's going to move like a little bit, but we're not going to get more of a permanent result of that. So what I'm going to have a guy lay on a tennis or lacrosse ball, maybe in that glute minimus area, for example. Let's say we identified that that was helpful for them. We're going to have them lay there for 3, 4, 5 minutes sometimes, and I would rather focus in on that particular area for 3 to 5 minutes than worrying about rolling 15 other things. Like I want to really focus in
Mhm.
and make sure that that area is really taken care of. So I think when we're looking at manual therapy, I'd rather be more specific. I might treat 6 to 8 spots in a particular session, and I want to know
Mhm.
that those spots aren't magically going to appear the next day. And I think that that
Mhm.
kind of goes back to that question earlier, which is when we're making these, when we're hanging out on spots or we're trying to treat particular areas, we need to spend the time needed in order for that tissue to be able to restore its sliding and gliding and its viscoelastic properties. Otherwise, we're kind of sort of doing something neural where we're like down regulating the
Mhm.
pain and the nociception in our brains and how that perceives the world, but we're not actually making a change to that tissue by going too fast. um, I think the other thing mistake that people make, and I mean you hear me say this often, like I don't want you to need me.
Mhm.
I'm here as a small tool. I'm nothing more than a segue for you to hopefully feel better, maybe perform a little bit better. But I'm not going to make you throw 100 miles an hour. Maybe we unlock something.
Mhm.
It's really and that's really cool when that happens. But I'm not magically going to make that. So I think there's this world of dependency and need. Now, that's not to say that people won't want to get touched and treated because there's something to be that feels good about that. Like flushes after a game are really good, but what are we really doing in a flush? We're moving fluid, right? Like
Mhm.
that's what we're doing. And so I think that that's really important to realize. Like for me is like I'm just one piece of that. I'd much rather have them out on the training floor doing good training than hanging out in my office. Um, and that them really wanting to need me. So I think that's something you see a lot in the professional world is this like dependency and need, and where guys are like, well, if I don't get my XYZ, and they start getting worked up over it. I'm like, dude, you were good well before you ever had this.
Yeah.
You're gonna be good well after this.
Yeah, dependency is a scary thing in this realm. I do think we see people who are like rock star manual therapists that can create that sense of dependency, and before you know it, they're selling people on all kinds of different snake oils and things like that. I love the idea of like, no, this is the avenue to go back and fix yourself. To build like a robust foundation of work capacity and movement, quality to keep you resilient. The other thing I was going to ask you for is I think one of the biggest things is protecting its downside, like knowing what to treat and what not to treat. Like I know over the years we've seen some stuff come in and where you're like, I'm not touching that. Like I just get a bad feeling about this. Maybe, talk about some of those examples. What should people be leery of just like racing to get treated for?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple things. Like number one, obviously we had that one person who had come in with chronic pain, and that goes back to the health history. Like, be like really vigilant
Mhm.
with knowing what medications they're taking, because I
Mhm.
didn't know that she was on a super high dose of a blood thinner, and even
Mhm.
though like it was super gentle, like a very gentle, the marks that were there and the bruising that she had a day or so after, obviously freaked her out, but I had no idea that we
Mhm.
were there. I think it's really important. Like obviously we've had people over the years with TOS. I've had a few people with clots. Obviously I don't think the studies are like there's some tests that you can do out there of whether it may or may not be a clot, but I'm not sure I really want to uh, rest my laurels on how good we are or aren't at them. But I mean, we had that one story. A lot of it's gut feeling sometimes, but when you start, obviously any swelling, right? Like we had a local a girl come in who had this swelling in her arm, and she had seen a bunch of doctors, and I'm like, okay, and they're like, yeah, no, they said we're clear, like we they actually recommended that we come see you, and they're like, well, what gives you swelling, right? Well, anytime my arm's over my head. Like, okay, I'm not like starting to get a little concerned there. I'm like, well, what else? Well, now it happens when I'm writing. I'm like, okay,
Mhm.
that's like a hands off, right away.
Yeah.
That's like you have to know when to refer out, and I'd rather refer out and at that point than try to be a superhero. Like you can't be all things to all people. Like it's just not going to happen. Obviously we had the case of the one kid who had the blood clot, and we made him go to the hospital for that, right? And even the doctor didn't want to get him an ultrasound. Fortunately, he had the wherewithal to push him around a little bit. He ended up having that massive blood clot in his leg. And that, when you start feeling these like weird global things, when you start seeing excessive swelling that doesn't make sense, that's not like an acute injury, things like that are important. Pins and needles, any disturbances, in their vision and things like that. And sometimes like people, I've had people who have like coming off like panic attacks and things of that nature as well. So those things are all really, really kind of important, and you have to know like when it's better to punt those and not punt those. But basically, anytime that you see those really weird swelling cases, I'm like, hey, I'm going to be hands off on that until we have a better diagnosis. But honestly, a lot of times, for many of those folks, it's the first time that they may or may not have had a problem. Right? We had the player last year that came in, and we're reviewing his health history, and I'm like, dude, like think you have TOS. Like, look at all these symptoms. Look at all this stuff, popping around, and you may or may not have it, right? But you want to put them in the appropriate doctor's hands who can better diagnose them. And you see that a lot with things like TOS, where people may have been, undiagnosed for 4 or 5 years, and again, you're just trying to be a tool to try to piece those things together for them.
Absolutely. You hinted at the importance of like the evaluation obviously begins with a thorough health history and even prying. But I also know one of the things that you hang your hat on a lot is like it's a reevaluation, right? It's a constant test, retest, during the actual treatment. I can't tell you how many times in a day, like I see someone like come out of your office and then just like throw the plow care ball against the wall a little bit just to see how it's moving after you've done some kind of intervention. Like, speak to like where that fits in, like how often you retest, what your mindset is with respect to testing the waters of that stuff.
I think originally, a lot of times, what you've seen, certainly in the manual world, is you see a lot of muscle testing, right? Like, and for me, I think that can be a slippery slope where you're like, oh, it's stronger. And a lot of times it is stronger, right? But like, if they don't perceive that, well, like, I'm not going to put that thought in their head. Like, if they're like, oh, this is stronger, but it still really hurts every time I lay my arm back, then that's not going to necessarily matter to me. Now, is that a tool to get there? Yes. So I think what we need to do is usually what I like to do is say, hey, what are the 2 or 3 things that are bothering you most right now? And then you try to figure that out, right? So whatever the one is the easiest, we had the kid with the back issue, was after 2 or 3 minutes every day, my back bothers me. Well, that's a really easy thing to test. So we're going to do some treatment, and then you're going to sit here for 2 or 3 minutes, and we're going to see if anything changes. And then we progress to, hey, at the bottom of a split squat, that bothers my back. So then we did the split squat. And then lastly, it was okay, running still bothers my back. So I'm like, all right, well, let's go run. So for an athlete, especially, ultimately the only thing that they don't care if their manual muscle test is better. They care if they can lay their arm back and they can whip a
Mhm.
ball against the wall, for example, in this case. But I think it's also important for, manual therapists or strength coach in general to know what looks right and what doesn't. Like you can
Mhm.
see when a guy goes and lays his arm back and he starts getting really pushy versus
Mhm.
that like natural layback. And that's what I love about fascia, right? Because how it connects to the brain is a little bit different, maybe than what our muscles do, and the mechano receptors and how they interact. Like it's not uncommon to see somebody who hasn't been able to do a movement. We had the one, the golfer guy who had trouble looking left for years and years and years, and after like some treatment, obviously, and weirdly enough, on his ankle, in that particular case, like he got up and looked left, and it was like he had never not been able to look left for the last, 10 or 20 years, whatever he
Mhm.
said that it was. And so that's what I love about the fascial component. But ultimately, like we have to test and retest what the athlete wants because we can't lie to ourselves. Like I hate that aspect of it, right? We're like, oh, you feel better. And then the athlete's like, no, I don't. Like, it doesn't matter what I think you feel like. It matters
Yeah,
what
you don't
you
want to lead
think
the
you feel
witness.
like. And most of the athletes that we're dealing with, even younger kids, like
So maybe this speaks to like this is a big question, but we both know there's some people out there who love to argue on social media about why there isn't, compelling research to support that manual therapy is effective. Um, we both know countless individuals who have benefited from it. I personally certainly feel better. I feel like I perform better when I have regular exposures to it. What would your response be to them? Like, what are the mechanisms actually that you think it is that that makes manual therapy effective, and why it's going to be a tool in our toolbox for many years to come.
Well, two things. One, I don't think all manual therapy is effective.
Mhm.
Um, because like, you know, wrong, good manual therapy at the wrong place is bad manual therapy, right?
Mhm.
Like we have to have some type of model. Even if you use a compression expansion model, right? Like, oh, have an elevated left hip, right? So and it's I can't get out of my right hip now, and maybe that's a QL, maybe it's a oblique, whatever that might be, maybe it's a piriformis, and so you have to have some type of model of what you're operating under to help with that. I think secondly, I usually just don't argue with those people on that because ultimately there's been so many studies that have come out. I mean, I kind of explained to the one earlier, like the effects of the viscoelastic properties of stretching a hamstring, improving the neck range of motion. I think what happens with those people though is because many manual therapists end up saying like, look at these changes that I've made, and then a day or two later they're right back, right? So they're very temporary changes. So even in that vein, I'm not like bench pressing one day and suddenly bench pressing 400 pounds. So there is a repetitious model to that. That's not necessarily the model that I always ascribe to.
Mhm.
But I think part of the reason that people say that is because I think we're looking very, very muscularly and not fascially, right? So, like, if we can figure out where those mono and biarticular fibers or the tendon, whatever that might be, that's holding on to the force there or isn't allowing our tissues to slide and glide correctly. I think that's where we know that your superficial and your deep fascia, like we know, like, right, like if it's going to transfer 30% of force, right, and that's probably, I think, probably a little bit understated. We know that how, like you can poke on your skin and you can see it move, right? Like we know that there's fluid and viscoelastic properties there that can be manipulated and changed, and I would say we see it every day. Like, if you want a bunch of studies and people have questions on that, I'm happy to give them a lengthy list of stuff from some of the Stecco work, some of the Tom Myers work. But we know that fascia exists all over the body, and we know that it's an interconnected system, and that's what I really really like about it. But I think people who say it doesn't exist and it's a placebo effect either haven't had really good manual therapy and don't understand it, or they're arguing in a lens that I might not disagree with him on either, right? Like, where it's like, oh, you know, we did 6 strokes on this and we released all the scar tissue. Like, no, you didn't. Like, that's you definitely didn't do that. Like, it's not like the research would indicate that you didn't do that. So I think with those folks, like, we can point out, a bunch of studies that they had in fascia's existence and how they're in a relationship with pain and restricted movement. Like, everything of that's like still really, really resolving. I think what was it, 2003, Carla Stecco, which was Antonio's daughter, like they ended up going through and they dissected so many cadavers to basically try to prove their hypothesis, and they basically verified the model's hypothesis, and they produced enough studies about it to find the structural differences between the specific regions, specific innervation of deep fascia, and a possible mechanism of action and associated manual techniques and how they can be manipulated and how that can change
Mhm.
that. Right. Like, there's and I don't have the ability to put it because it's like a paid video, but you can see, like, under diagnostic ultrasound, the difference. For example, in this one video, that was an example of a guy's, I want to say it was his right leg, and the viscoelastic properties and how all the fibers of the fascia and the hyaluron between the fascia, like, you can literally see them sliding and gliding next to each other. And then you can go to the other leg where they had sciatica existing, and you can like you don't have to be super trained in this to be able to see there is a massive difference there. And
Mhm.
then watching what happens from post treatment. So we actually do have the abilities. Diagnostic ultrasound is actually pretty cool, and I don't think that it can't get down to like the super nitty gritty of everything, but it gives us enough of a picture to be able to like prove that it's there. And again, the Stegos had done plenty of studies with treatment on people who had rolled ankles, treat people who had never rolled their ankles, and then people who had a previous ankle sprain. And like those who had treatment even on a previous ankle sprain ended up faring better that soccer season than those who had never rolled an ankle. Like they had less incidence of rolled ankle, and you can call that you know coincidence all you want, but they've been able to prove these studies over and time again.
It's fascinating. Maybe getting a little more granular. Obviously, this is a baseball podcast. Let's talk about some baseball presentations. I mean, obviously, we see a ton of anterior shoulder pain. We see a ton of medial elbow discomfort. These are some of the most common things you'll encounter. We see a lot of stuff get labeled as biceps tendonitis. We know that's sometimes not the case. When you look at throwers, obviously you're digging in deep on the full health history, but what are some of the areas that you find yourself, honing in on the most from a manual therapy perspective? And what do you need to rule in or out in this population?
Above and below it, I
Mhm,
want you to find where the pain is,
mhm,
and then I want to go above and below that because we want to work globally on
mhm,
this like tension release. So if I can go above the level of pain, so let's say I have bicep tendonitis, right? I would want to go up to that like scapular region, the neck region, and then go at least a segment below that. So maybe my bicep or even down into my forearm, and try to like check to see where those things are at. So again, it goes back to that health history to your point. Like if I'm somebody who is having anterior shoulder pain and I had TJ 3 years earlier, like, that's my gold right there. Like, I'm
mhm,
almost certain most of the time that that's going to give me a great bit of relief, especially if this
mhm,
is new anterior shoulder pain. Now, if we have a history of anterior shoulder pain and we had an acute shoulder pain issue because I got, hit with a line drive or something like that,
mhm,
obviously that changes what your outlook's going to be on that. But I think for them, it's like always above and below. Hands are important, thumbs are important. But for this example, let's say I do have anterior shoulder pain, but I had TJ, and through palpation and verification and even movement verification as well, right? Like, are we struggling moving in a frontal plane? Are we
mhm,
struggling moving in a rotational plane? Are we struggling moving in a sagittal plane? And that's not always necessarily the best way to identify, but if you use that as a tool with your palpation and with your verification, we might find, something in there like medial septum, like down by the
mhm,
elbow, where the brachialis and bicep, and it might just not be sliding and gliding together. So you might get this big benefit of that now where they used to feel faint elbow pain in that pronate or flexor tendon area is gone, but now they have more shoulder flexion or now they have more layback. And then you might jump up above and you found their particular, let's say it's a frontal plane issue in this particular thing. Maybe you find something up in their neck between their posterior scalene and their trapezius, which would be a counter rotation in Stecco's model in the frontal plane, and you realize like that's really stiff, or it's not moving the way that you want to, or it's really point tender. And you'll know the difference of point tender because if you're poking things with like a pound or two of pressure and they start jumping and squirming, but you can poke something else with a pound or two of pressure and then they're like perfectly calm. Like there's a disruption there. The brain is obviously sensing something there that it does not like. And so again, in this case, I would go above and treat that and then see where we are globally. But I think when we look at, let's say, we'll call it biceps tendonitis, what is causing that? Well, we know that my posterior capsule, my infraspinatus, and all that, like that fascia wraps around. We know that my coracoid brachialis fascia wraps around and intersects with my subscap. We know, like I just said, that the infraspinatus and the supraspinatus that wrap around and intersects with my subscap. My serratus is going to intersect with my subscap. Is my shoulder really low? Do I have some type of my QL is going to intersect and be very much at play in this particular example with my lat. Um, and so all of those things are going to become really important in helping diagnose that. So when we say we have bicep tendon, maybe it is. Maybe it's a legit bicep tendonitis, but we might have something going on where they can't, adduct across their body. Well, maybe I'm thinking that's something where they're not sliding, gliding between the subclavius and the pec major area. And that's what's getting stuck in there. Like, and we don't really know until we palpate, but the point of maybe this long winded answer is bicep tendonitis pain could come from a pec, it could come from a serratus, it could come from a cord brachialis, it could come from medial septal, it could come from an elbow, it could at times come from a previous broken thumb. There's a lot of different variations of stuff. So I would just always encourage people in that vein when they're looking for bicep tendon pain, even if you're not super familiar with stecco and fascia manipulation, which is fine, investigate some of those other areas. I can't tell you how many times we've treated people like just underneath that pec where the serratus starts to intersect. And then you're like, oh, my T spine rotation got better too. That's weird, and you start seeing things like that, and you're like, oh well, it literally fascially interplays into your obliques. But like, there's a lot of other areas out there than just thinking I have bicep tendonitis, I'm going to treat my infraspinatus, or I'm going to treat my bicep tendon.
That's a lot to unpack, but very, very important. Look everywhere is the short version. And don't there's no biceps tendonitis program, right? And let's be real, it's probably not an inflammatory pathology anyway. It's probably more degenerative if it is the
Yes,
biceps tendon.
exactly.
So it's a whole other podcast. But look everywhere. Maybe speak to like individual approaches, right? You talked about like the last thing you want to do is thrash a starter the day before he goes out and
Sure, sure.
pitches. We also have relief pitchers where they might not know when they're going to pitch, right? And they just want to get treated. So obviously they can come in and, get treated after an outing, but there's a chance that they might have to go and throw the next day. Like, how can manual therapy, work effectively, align with maybe a less predictable training cycle, like a reliever versus something that's very predictable for a starter?
Yeah, I think with relievers, right? Like, we don't know, so they might get used 3 days in a row and then be shelved for 10 days.
Mhm,
So those guys are really, first and foremost. You just have to know who they
mhm,
are, right? You have to know, again, going back to knowing their medical history. At that point, like, I kind of have a hat on here. I take this hat off
mhm,
of like a stecco hat or a fascia manipulation hat. I put on a different hat and say, hey, what routine can I get in with you?
mhm,
That's going to make sense for us, that we can do. And that, honestly, that's like what we do on a Sunday morning. Like, there's certain guys, there's a routine, because we want to be as predictable as we can on game day. But if a guy does have an injury that pops up, I always feel pretty safe if I'm treating, further away from the area. Again, like in this example, and they have a bicep tendon pain, like, I don't mind that much. Like, if I'm going up into their neck a little bit more, or down into their hands, for example, a little bit more, where I want to try to get that. But at that point, I think we have to have a conversation saying, hey, this treatment's going to be a little bit longer, and it's going to be a lot lighter. It's just going to take more time to get to our desired end goal. But for those guys, I think it's important to have it. Maybe they do love cupping. Like, who
mhm,
cares? Go ahead and cup it. Maybe it's one of those things where, you know, once a week they're getting needled in
mhm.
their hip, and once a week they're getting needled in their shoulder. But I think for those guys, just from a predictability standpoint, and knowing how, I don't want to say superstitious, but routine oriented athletes are, it's finding a good routine for them. But there's nothing wrong with doing active release or trigger point on those guys as a maintenance, and trying to make sure that they still feel good. I mean, right? Like, we know that the brain, whether or not the mechanical issue is fixed completely or not, is neither here nor there to them at that point, right? They're the only thing that they really care about is, can I go throw? So there
Yeah.
is the brain down regulating that localized area of pain or inflammation, if you will.
We've talked a lot about the baseball side of things, but as we alluded to earlier, like you do have an NFL role. The obvious difference is that NFL is heavily lower extremity injuries. You obviously see Achilles ruptures, ACLs, hammy. The other one is we still see some of that stuff, but for the most part, it's an upper extremity focused population. Are these very, very different fish to fry? Are there unique distinctions between treating your NFL guys and treating your baseball guys? Obviously, NFL players, you get guys that are 400 pounds, you get guys that are absolute physical specimens that are, legit 6% body fat and huge dehydration risk and things like that. Are there big like picture principles that differentiate those two populations for you?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say, that's the biggest thing, is the difference of guaranteed contracts.
Interesting.
That's a big difference for stuff. And so, I think sometimes in the baseball world, obviously if guys are in contract years and things like that, it's a little bit different. But there's also 17 games in an NFL season and 162 in a baseball season.
Yeah.
So they have to be prime and ready for everything. So I do there are differences there. I think a lot of times though, it's just those guys during the week, like they might have meetings until 5 o'clock for 3 or 4 days a week, and they may have gotten in there at 6 or 6:30 in the morning. right? So, on a Tuesday they're going to have off. On a Monday is a day after a game. Like a lot of guys, like you're hurting, like it freaking hurts. And then so like your big money days are really Wednesday and Thursday, but really more likely probably Thursday after practice. And you hope and pray that they have a fast Friday and that it's not going to be a longer where they're going to be accumulating too many sprint yards on a Friday. So you have to be careful with how sore that you make those guys. But obviously you're going to see way more hammies, right? Like in
Mhm.
football players, you're going to see way more like acute stuff. And I'd say with football in general, you have to really, like for me anyway, 'cause I'm kind of like a liaison in between the strength and conditioning department and athletic trainers and stuff like that. For me, um, I have to make sure like anything acute is really like we have to get that documented. Like I know there was one guy, he's like, oh, I can you work on my hip? And I'm like, well, it's an acute injury and there's some swelling there. And, this has happened this past year. And he ended up having like an avulsion. Like that would have made that situation a lot worse. But for those guys in general, when it comes to season time, I stress for them like we try to get as much done as we can outside of season. But when it comes
Mhm.
to season time, it's really trying to know your person who you're working with, and then picking and choosing like this week I know, this guy's not going to be running as much on Friday, so we can really get into him on Thursday. Whereas that baseball population is going to be a lot less like acute injuries of like, unless you get hit by a ball, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to have actual collisions and things of that nature. So the collisions and getting hit definitely makes things a little bit harder because there's like an insurance process and a documentation
Yeah.
process that has to take place there. Which is why, like with them, we just call me like sports performance therapy
Mhm.
versus like any rehabilitative nature.
We've got a lot of rehab specialists, and aspiring ones that listen to this podcast. Maybe people that come from like maybe a traditional physical therapy background, um, but maybe not ones that were strong in their manual therapy curriculum, right? So, if you had someone that is a massage therapy student or somebody in that realm that wanted to get proficient as a manual therapist, what recommendations would you have for those folks, like to actually go out and attack that aspect of their professional development?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I started a lot of the fashion manipulation stuff earlier,
Mhm.
and the thing that and reason being is like that they made more sense to me.
Mhm.
Like they had, I mean, they've dissected so many cadavers, and put stuff together that made sense. Like, hey, this is logical to me, and they've
Mhm.
tried to prove and disprove their stuff. And so I like when people try to prove their stuff wrong, right? Because that it's going to refine their model. So that I would probably jump into that more so. But it also kind of depends on what clinic and stuff you're working in. Like, I'm not sure. Like with an older clientele, or like a in hospital setting with that, like the idea of just moving fluid and helping those folks get moving, that type of manual therapy is probably not my strong suit. Getting up and getting down. So I think that reading on it, but I think having a strong manual thing, like if you're really good at active release, just get really good at it. I think you should be able to practice something for a period of time because then you're just like kind of average at everything.
Mhm.
Like whether if you want to do active release, go into it. If I could go back and do everything all over again, I would have, as soon as I was done with school, I would have started a Steco course because it would have helped me get out some of the eyewash
Mhm.
that we had to kind of go through, and it would have made me a lot less frustrated in
Mhm.
the long
A
run.
stronger diagnostic model almost is what it seems like.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like now I'm not
Absolutely.
guessing. Well, I can see that his left hip's high, and I know that it's going to impact his right, shoulder internal rotation. But I'm looking at that from a different model than
Mhm.
that. But I think that, and then I also think for people who are rehabilitative specialists or whatever, like having a model of which you trust from a corrective exercise, is that allowed to be said?
Sure.
I don't know if I
Absolutely.
believe it or not, but like having a model of which you can do like a an exercise or something of that after you have somebody who has like a heavy valgus carrying angle, like how can we get them to like properly pronate? after that, and
Mhm.
being able to like put these people in good positions afterwards is really, really important because you have some people who rely on manual therapy and only do manual therapy, and that's supposed to fix everything, and that's stupid. And then you have other people that are so Therex, and I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, well, we can get a 1 or 2 month head start on this. But again, like kind of answering your question, I would probably go back and do a lot more of like the fascia manipulation. And if that's not your cup of tea, that's fine. But I would just say it's really important to look at things more globally than we realize, right? We do it every
Yeah.
day, like in a PRI lens, like we do it, or a compression expansion model lens, or a breathing lens, whatever that might be. We see this every single day, that a low right shoulder is going to be a compressed right rib cage, for example. In this example, like there's a lot of stuff going on there. We can't just be like, well, let's have him do some more shrugs or just trap raises to do that. Or like, no, maybe that's getting some expansion in his rib cage. So I think
Mhm.
like making sure that you have some type of model which you can operate under, and realize that there's a lot more globally going on than we realize, because hips and shoulders are really going to mirror each other.
Absolutely. What about for end users, right? So we talked about the actual clinicians wanting to get better. What about, a baseball player, 16-year-old kid listening to this with his parents in the car who's dealing with some chronic stuff? Like, how do they find a good manual therapist? Are there certain things that you look for, and where to look, to kind of find those people?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's searches, right, for active release providers and, Graston and things of that nature. That's a hard question because, right,
Mhm.
like that's like saying like, how do we search for a contractor? Well,
Yeah.
there's a million contractors, but like sometimes you don't know if they're good or not unless you have somebody who's been recommended by
Yeah.
them, or you realize that they're not good because you use them and you're like, wow, they're
Mhm.
terrible, or they are good because you've used them. So I think in that case, I mean, we have found people so many manual therapists across the country, and I know that you do it
Mhm.
all the time. But I do think it's probably trying to find somebody out there and ask around, to try to find
Mhm.
somebody who's really, really good. But things that you're going to look for are they staring at the clock as soon as you walk in?
Yeah.
Are they going to treat you on day one, or is it going to be just some complete diagnostic session to collect however much they're going to charge you that day? I think at least a little bit of treatment on day one is appropriate. I think, do they take a good medical history?
Mhm.
Did they watch you move? Have they seen any video of you? Like asking these type of questions. Are they only rubbing on your bicep when your
Mhm.
bicep hurts? Are they doing any other thing? Asking you, what other sports you've played?
Yeah.
What's a day to day life look like for you? Are you sitting a lot? Are you standing a lot? Are you sprinting? Like, what are you? How long have you been dealing with it? Like
Mhm.
having a good questionnaire goes a long way in telling you how thorough. Or you can go in and you see sometimes, oh, this is hilarious. I've had this happen to me. My wife made me get a couples massage, and I was so mad at her because I'm like, I know she's gonna be upset about this, but it was like circle the areas that are sore on you, and then you go in and you hand it to him, and the guy like threw it away. Like,
Yeah.
what the heck did I just circle that for?
And then he just
um,
goes and does his normal massage.
Exactly, exactly. So I think that that's important, but find the thing that bothers you at least a little bit or the most,
Mhm.
and go from there, right? Like we had that today. Like it was a side lying external rotation, and there was no strength in it, and it was creating a bicep tendon issue for this person. Well, he said that's really annoying for him, and it makes him think that he's not okay. Like, okay, well, that's our test now.
Mhm.
Then we're gonna test and retest. Maybe it's a shoulder flexion test, like, "Hey,
Mhm.
when I get overhead, I feel pinching in my bicep thing." But I do think that test and retest, and I really, really think having, like, that good questionnaire is really important, and if they tell you that you're gonna need to see them this, the entire whatever, 6 months before they get better, like, that's not then we're not doing what we're saying. If we're releasing
Yeah.
scar tissue, or and I'm putting that in air quotes right here, if we're doing that, then why is it coming back? We're not doing what
Mhm.
we're saying we're doing then.
Yeah, I think even just the follow-up too, like you give people homework. Like even, if you're seeing somebody for an hour, the last 3 or 4 minutes, in many cases, you're coming out and they're going through a couple of exercises with you or, with another one of our coaches, just to make sure that those changes stick and that, you're not completely starting from square one. If you see them a week later, it's something that should theoretically hold and get better and better with each successive treatment.
Yeah, or you were wrong, right? Like maybe
Yeah.
your hypothesis is wrong. If there's times that you treat people and you know that like you did a lot of tendinous work, or you did, you hit like, because sometimes like when people come in, they might have multiple different like pathways that you're
Yeah.
dealing with. So you're trying to say, well, this was the one that seems to make the most sense. So we're going to treat this, and maybe it was 3 or 4 of their symptoms got better, but it
Mhm.
was the ones that they didn't care about nearly as much, right? So, like, part of that's, like, a thing too, like, I'm always, like, rechecking and making
Mhm.
sure to do that. So, like, when you have to be okay, like, manual therapists, they'll be like, "Oh, you're good, you feel good, right?" Like, "That's good." Like, you have to be okay with somebody being like, "No, it doesn't. It still sucks." Like, "Okay, my thought process then was not correct, and I need
Mhm.
to readjust that, or I need to readjust, is this just a manual therapy thing, or is this somebody who has high blood pressure, but they're putting salt on everything, for example, right? Like,
Mhm.
is this a lifestyle component that we need to help them with as well?" And so I think it's just definitely being able to brutal honesty is always king.
Mhm. That's awesome. Well, this is incredible in the sense that I talk to you every day, and this is like the first time I've actually ever really had these conversations, more of an interview format where it's not just like a conversation in passing as we're collaborating on an athlete or something like that. So I actually picked up on some cool stuff. I appreciate you taking the time, man.
Yeah, no problem, man. Appreciate
Folks
you
can
having me on.
Absolutely. Folks can find you on Twitter. It's at Rye_Shane. They can obviously learn more about you through all the CSP channels that we've got out there. And, if they're in the area and need to get treated, you're obviously super accessible, not just to our athletes, but to anybody that is interested. So, again, you're the man. Thanks for taking the time.